The house was alive with a quiet energy as the warm afternoon sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a cozy glow over the living room. Avery mechanically arranged the last set of glasses on the table, her mind preoccupied with the thought of Ryder's return home. Despite knowing she shouldn't feel excited, she couldn't help the flutter in her chest. Asher, her husband, sat engrossed in his work at his desk in the corner, his presence more of a background shadow than a partner. Avery glanced over at him, noticing how his once warm gaze had turned cold and distant over the years. Their conversations had become mundane, limited to discussions about bills, schedules, and forgotten plans. Avery let out a quiet sigh, reminding herself that it was normal for marriages to evolve over time. Still, a hollow ache lingered in her chest. When Ryder finally walked through the door, the room seemed to brighten. He had grown into a confident young man with a charming smile that effortlessly lit up his face. "Avery," he greeted warmly, pulling her into a tight hug. She felt the solid strength of his arms, and for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to savor the warmth of his embrace. She closed her eyes, letting herself savor the comfort of his warmth. "Welcome back," she said, pulling away and forcing herself to sound casual. "How was the trip?" Ryder chuckled. "Long, but I'm glad to be home. The food at uni is awful. I missed your cooking." Asher barely looked up from his laptop. "Good to see you, son," he said, his tone flat, distracted. Ryder's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Good to see you too, Dad." Later that evening, Avery found herself lingering in the kitchen while Ryder stood nearby, recounting stories about his time away. He was animated, his voice full of energy, and Avery couldn't help but laugh at his tales. It had been so long since she felt this kind of lightness. "You're too kind, Avery," Ryder said after a particularly funny story, his eyes locking onto hers. "Dad's lucky to have you." Her breath caught for a moment. The compliment was innocent enough, but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She quickly busied herself with stirring the pot on the stove, not trusting herself to respond. Avery noticed the small ways Ryder filled the void Asher left. He helped her set the table, asked her questions about her day, and actually listened to the answers. Asher, meanwhile, was glued to his phone, his presence almost entirely forgotten. Sheila arrived late into the evening, her laugh ringing out as she embraced Avery. "You're glowing," she teased, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "What's the occasion?" Avery brushed off the comment with a laugh, but Sheila's words lingered. Sheila had always been perceptive, her intuition unnervingly accurate. As the night continued, Avery found herself avoiding her friend's knowing gaze, unsure of what it was Sheila might see. By the time the evening ended, Avery felt an unfamiliar mixture of guilt and anticipation brewing within her. Avery woke earlier than usual the next morning, drawn to the quiet stillness of the house. She found Ryder in the kitchen, already awake, sipping coffee. His relaxed smile greeted her as she stepped in. "Morning, Maria," he said warmly, surprised by his early rise. Ryder shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Jet lag, I guess." He gestured toward the coffee pot. "Want some?" Avery hesitated but nodded. Ryder poured her a cup, their hands brushing lightly as he passed it to her. The brief touch made her stomach flutter, and she cursed herself for noticing. She sipped her coffee, trying to focus on the mundane routine, rather than the way his presence seemed to change the air around her. They chatted casually, the conversation flowing effortlessly, and Avery found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. Ryder's charm was undeniable, and his attention felt intoxicating. He asked about her hobbies, her interests, things Asher hadn't bothered to inquire about in years. She felt seen in a way she hadn't for so long, and it terrified her how much she liked it. As the days passed, Ryder's presence became a fixture in Avery's routine. They spent more time together, under the guise of simple tasks. He joined her in the garden, offering to help with the weeds. They cooked meals side by side, laughing over her insistence on sticking to recipes, while Ryder experimented with new flavors and ingredients. Avery told herself it was harmless, just a mother and stepson bonding. But the moments of closeness grew more frequent. When Ryder stood behind her to reach for something in the cupboard, his hand grazing her arm, her heart skipped a beat. When he complimented the dress she wore one afternoon, she felt her cheeks flush like a schoolgirl. One evening, while Asher worked late yet again, Avery and Ryder sat on the patio, sipping wine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ryder leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. "You deserve better, Avery," he said softly, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite name. She stiffened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I mean, I see how hard you try. You give everything to this family, to Dad, and it's like he doesn't even notice." Shawolf turned to Shamesh, his expression simply stating how he felt. Avery's breath caught. "He's just busy," she said, though the words sounded hollow, even to her. Ryder shook his head. "That's not an excuse. You're incredible, Avery. Anyone would be lucky to have you." His words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Avery felt her pulse quicken as she searched for a response, but none came. Ryder's gaze didn't waver, and for a brief, dangerous moment, she wondered what it would feel like to let herself lean into that attention instead. She stood abruptly. "It's getting late," she said, her voice shaky. "We should go inside." Ryder nodded, but didn't break eye contact. "Of course. Good night, Avery." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself she needed to stop this before it went too far, but deep down, a small, treacherous part of her wasn't sure if she wanted to. The house was quiet again, the kind of stillness that made Avery's thoughts louder than she wanted them to be. Asher was at work, as usual, and Ryder was in the living room. She told herself to stay busy, to avoid letting her mind wander where it shouldn't, but when she passed the doorway and saw him stretched out on the couch, scrolling through his phone, she hesitated. "Hey, Avery," Ryder called out, noticing her. His smile was easy, inviting, and before she knew it, she was walking toward him, drawn in by the warmth of his gaze. Stepping into the room. "You're taking it easy today," she said lightly, trying to ignore how her heart sped up just being around him. "I earned it," he teased. "Want to sit with me for a bit?" She hesitated, knowing she shouldn't, but his tone made it impossible to say no. "In my bedsheet?" he asked. "You've been to the filling, you," she replied, walking past him to the parlor door. She sank into the chair across from him, her hands gripping the armrests tightly, as though grounding herself. They started talking again, as they always seemed to these days. Ryder had a way of drawing her out, making her laugh, making her feel seen. She felt lighter, freer when she was around him. It wasn't fair, but she couldn't deny it. At some point the conversation slowed, and the air between them changed. Ryder sat up, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Avery," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, unsure if her voice would even work. "Are you happy?" His words were soft, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Was she happy? She didn't even know anymore. "You don't have to answer," he said when her silence stretched too long. "I can see it, you know," Ryder said, his voice low and gentle. "You deserve so much more than this." Her breath caught, and she stood abruptly, trying to put distance between them. "Ryder, we can't. I'm not saying anything wrong," he interrupted, standing too. He was close now, too close. I just want you to know that you're not invisible. You're amazing, Avery. You shouldn't have to settle for being ignored." Her pulse raced as she took a step back, but he followed. His hand reached out gently, brushing hers, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. "Ryder, this is—" she started to say, but he cut her off. "Tell me to stop," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you want me to stop, I will. But I don't think you do." She should have said it. She should have told him to stop, to leave, to never bring this up again. But she couldn't. Her body betrayed her, her silence speaking volumes. Slowly, he leaned closer, his hand now resting on hers. She felt frozen, caught between the crushing weight of guilt and the undeniable pull of desire. When his lips finally brushed hers, she didn't pull away. The kiss was tentative at first, as if he was waiting for her to push him away. But she didn't. Though both of them were testing the boundaries they were about to destroy, the kiss quickly deepened, and Avery felt herself giving in completely. Every thought of consequences was pushed aside in favor of the raw, overwhelming sensation of being wanted. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, Avery stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. "Ryder, we can't. This is wrong." "I know," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his eyes. "But it doesn't feel wrong, does it?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she turned and fled the room, leaving him standing there, his words echoing in her mind. It didn't feel wrong, and that terrified her. Avery avoided Ryder for the next 2 days, throwing herself into chores, errands, and anything that kept her away from the suffocating pull she felt around him. But avoiding him didn't erase what had happened. It was all she could think about. The kiss, his touch, the way it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Asher remained oblivious. He came home late, exhausted, barely sparing her a glance before retreating to his usual routine, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. When he did speak, it was about trivial things. Groceries, bills, the weekend plans. His indifference only magnified the storm inside Avery. On the third evening, Avery found Sheila waiting for her in the kitchen. The sharp look in her friend's eyes made her heart skip a beat. "You've been acting strange," Sheila said bluntly, crossing her arms. "What's going on?" Avery forced a smile. "Nothing, just busy, I guess." Sheila tilted her head, studying her closely. "Busy avoiding Ryder, more like." "What are you talking about?" Sheila's voice was quiet, but firm. "I see things, Avery. You think I don't notice the way he looks at you, or the way you light up when he's around? Don't insult me." Avery's stomach churned. "It's not what you think," she stammered. Sheila challenged her. "Then tell me what it is." Avery opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. The silence stretched, and Sheila's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're doing, Avery," Sheila said finally, "but you need to stop, for everyone's sake." At night, Avery sat alone in the living room, the weight of Sheila's words settling heavy on her shoulders, her thoughts a tangled mess. Sheila was right, she knew that. But stopping felt impossible, as if summoned by her thoughts. Ryder walked in, his presence filling the room. He hesitated when he saw her, his expression a mix of caution and determination. "Avery," he said softly, "we need to talk." She shook her head. "No, we don't." "Yes, we do," he insisted, stepping closer. "You can't pretend this didn't happen." "I won't." She stood, her arms wrapped around herself. "Ryder, this is a mistake. It has to stop." "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Why does it have to stop when it feels like the only real thing in my life?" His words hit her harder than she expected. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "Because it's wrong. Because it will destroy everything." "It doesn't have to," he said, his voice softer now. "We can figure this out together," he added. Avery turned back to face him, her heart aching. "You don't understand. If Asher finds out, if Sheila knows—" "She already knows," he interrupted, his tone calm. "Or at least she suspects. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you." The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable, and Avery felt her resolve crumbling. But before she could respond, the sound of a door opening upstairs froze them both. Asher appeared at the top of the stairs, his face shadowed in the dim light. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharp. Avery's heart sank as she met Ryder's gaze. This was the moment everything would unravel. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Ryder stepped forward, his voice steady. "Nothing, Dad. We were just talking." Ava's eyes narrowed, flicking between them. "Talking about what?" Avery finally found her voice. "The garden," she said quickly. "I was asking Ryder about fixing the shed." Asher didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. "I'm going to bed," he said, curtly before turning away. When he was gone, Avery exhaled shakily. Ryder reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "This has to end," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ryder's expression fell, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." Avery didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, her chest heavy with regret and relief. Upstairs, Asher was already asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his roof, but Avery knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. Secrets like this had a way of coming to light, and when they did, there would be no escaping the fallout.